Great. And just so everyone knows, we have Erin Hinson and Maddie Pleasant from the city offices helping me out today, as well as Joanna Quinn from the streets team. So quick guidelines, everyone please mute your audio when you're not speaking. Obviously, please be respectful of other attendees during the session, and the meeting chats will be saved at the end of each session for our reference. If you have any questions before we start, please drop those in the chat. And I want to mention that it's probably best to participate in today's conversation on a desktop because it will be hard to review and comment on the mapping exercise later in the presentation if you're on a phone. So today's objective is to have a community conversation about the draft 2040 policy map recommendations within the Northeast Intergeography. Before we dive into today's conversation, we will provide some high-level information about the Charlotte Streets map and the 2040 policy map. However, there is a more in-depth overview of those two projects that's recorded and available online. And I believe someone will be dropping the link for that in the chat for you all if you want to look at it. Throughout the meeting, please feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can today, and any that we don't answer will definitely be posted online with a response for you afterwards. So with that, let's briefly review some introductory information. The purpose of the 2040 policy map, as well as the streets map and the UDO, is to help implement the vision of the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which is our guiding document for city's growth and development over the next 20 years. The comprehensive plan was adopted in June 2021, and there are now several major initiatives underway to help put the plan into action, and you can see those on the bottom half of the slide. The 2040 map will identify appropriate locations for future development in our neighborhoods. The Charlotte Streets map will define the multimodal vision for Charlotte streets to support mobility between the places where we live, work, and play. And the Unified Development Ordinance will consolidate and update the city's land development regulations, so future development is aligned with the vision of the comprehensive plan. And just so folks are aware, a draft of the UDO was released this month, and you can find that on the city's website. So the 2040 policy map and the Charlotte Streets map will both help implement the vision of the plan, and they'll accomplish this by informing how our built environment evolves and changes over time. So the built environment includes both land use and transportation related characteristics. So each map provides information about the places that we want to create. In particular, the 2040 policy map will inform the type of development, including land uses and building form, that is appropriate for specific geographies throughout the community. And the streets map will help define the future cross sections and streetscape requirements. So with just a brief understanding of both of those maps and how they're intended to help implement the vision of the plan, they will both help inform the city's built environment over time. So I'm going to quickly give a brief rundown of the streets map before we move on to the main topic today, which is that 2040 policy map. So the streets map focuses on the space in between the buildings that provide for mobility. All of the components that you can see in the diagram work together to create streets that allow people to move about our city in more ways and also more easily. So the streets map is the mapped vision for our multimodal street network, and it's based on council adopted policies over the last several years. The map is currently in a draft state, and we want to remind you that you can go online to review and provide comments on the streets map as well as the policy map through November 14th. So in that online platform, when you click on an arterial street, there'll be a pop-up box that includes information about the street cross section, a bunch of other things that you can review. You can then make a comment on the street and go through that process for as many streets as you're interested in. There are more detailed instructions for how to review and comment on the map at charlottegov.me/CLTfuture. And today we're going to be focusing on the 2040 policy map. But if you do have any questions or comments about the streets, we really encourage you to put those in the chat, and we'll pass them along to the streets team who will post responses to them on the project website. So to get into today's main topic, the policy map is a companion document to the comprehensive plan, and it will translate the plan's vision and policies to specific geographies in the community. The policy map aims to provide a comprehensive and citywide direction for accommodating Charlotte's projected growth, while also protecting features that are important to residents, such as the natural environment and established neighborhoods. The mapping effort will also ensure that we align future growth with infrastructure capacity. So based on the community guidance throughout the comprehensive plan process, we know that we need to grow in a way that is equitable for everyone. We want to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past and that we provide access to those who have been historically underserved. Since the objective of this mapping effort is to evaluate and balance citywide needs and opportunities, the policy map will not provide really parcel specific or block by block analysis. That level of analysis will occur in the community area planning process that will take place after the policy map's been adopted. So just to set a few things up, you're going to hear us talk a lot today about place types. Place types are a classification system to organize patterns of development. They are more high level than just the details of a zoning district, and they're more holistic than just land use. So land use only talks about the type of development, whether it be residential, commercial, or industrial on a property. But place types really look at the whole picture for a place, which includes not just land use, but building form, mobility, and open space. So for an example, an area of single family housing would then fall into the neighborhood 1 place type, which is that light yellow you see on the map, and would therefore receive guidance about not just the use, but also the character, the streets, all of the things that make that a recognizable and livable place. So throughout the comprehensive plan, 10 place types were created to classify different types of development in Charlotte. And those place types were vetted by the community during that plan process. The policy map process will now apply those 10 place types to specific areas throughout the community. So just to give you a little familiarity, here is the place types palette itself, and they generally fall into live, work, and play categories. So in the live category, you have the 2 types of neighborhoods in Charlotte. Neighborhood 1 is that single family housing, and neighborhood 2 is higher density housing areas, such as townhomes or apartments or quadplexes, stuff like that. We also include parks and preserves in that live category. The work category includes commercial areas, campus areas, which might be a university or a hospital, innovation mixed use, which is a mix of light industrial as well as other uses like employment. A lot of times there's an artistic component to that place type, or breweries, stuff like that. Camp North End is a really good example of this place type. And then you have manufacturing logistics, which is a pretty fancy term for a range of industrial uses. And then finally, there are 3 scales of centers. The smallest is a neighborhood activity center. All of these centers include a mix of uses. So it can include some housing, some goods and services, some commercial, etc. At a neighborhood scale, these are going to be pretty small and walkable. The community activity center is going to be a little bit larger and more dense. And then the regional activity center is the largest and most dense of the mixed use areas. So something like Uptown would be classified as a regional activity center. All right, so with those 10 place types in mind, what we're looking at today is the first draft of applying those place types to specific locations in Charlotte. This process happened in 3 steps. So the first step was to translate the existing development that's on the ground today into that 10 place types palette. So translating that area of single family housing into neighborhood 1. The second step was to translate the city's adopted area plans into place types. This step shows how Charlotte would grow if we did nothing different and we didn't map the comprehensive plan policies. This basically showed us what the city would look like if we continued with business as usual. And we're going to call this the adopted policies map, but I just want to remind everyone that it doesn't include guidance from the comprehensive plan. It's just mapping those pre-comprehensive plan policies. So the third step built upon that adopted policies map and revised the map to reflect the new comprehensive plan policies. And by building off the adopted policy map, this process doesn't erase any of that past planning, which is still really valuable for the community. Instead, it respects what's working in our community and only revises the shortcomings that fail to address our current and future needs. So there were several data inputs used in each of those three mapping steps. And for the sake of time, I'm going to touch upon those data inputs when we review the policy map recommendations for this specific area. So diving into today's specific geography, this is the Northeast Inner Area. It's generally bounded by Central Avenue, Eastway Drive / Sugar Creek Road, and the 277 Loop. It includes neighborhoods of Plaza Midwood and Noda, as well as several others. And as mentioned, the mapping approach began by translating what's on the ground today and what future place types would look like without the comprehensive plan. So that first step, again, was translating existing land uses and development into the 10 place types in the palette. This translation was based on existing land use data and development patterns. So the Northeast Inner Area today is primarily single family neighborhoods, which is neighborhood 1 in that light yellow color. There are a few major corridors of other uses, including commercial uses, which are in red along the plaza, industrial uses, which are in dark purple, as well as some light industrial in that light purple along North Davidson Street, and commercial and multifamily. The multifamily is that orange color along Central Avenue. And there are also a few patches of campus, which is in the teal color. And most notably, that's Garinger High School along Eastway Drive in that upper right corner. So again, this is what is on the ground today in that 10 place types palette. So the second step in the mapping approach was to translate the city's adopted policies and existing entitlements into place types. This translation was based on a couple of inputs. The first was future land use recommendations for areas that have area plans adopted since 2010, which provide guidance for a little less than a third of the city. So there are a lot of areas of the city that weren't benefiting from area plans. For the remaining portions of the city, that other 2/3 about, the adopted policy map was informed by the zoning. In some instances, there wasn't really a clear translation between the existing zoning and the future place types assignment. And in those instances, we used market analysis to determine which future place types assignment was most realistic from a market perspective. So you can see in the place type assignments how they changed between the existing development and the adopted policies map on the right side of the slide. Some of the changes included some of the parks land was changed to neighborhood 1 as it wasn't protected by any policies before the comprehensive plan. Most of the manufacturing and logistics becomes either a community or regional activity center, and a lot of the campus uses go away, which is partially because schools are now being included in the neighborhood place types, and partially because they weren't protected or even properly defined in the zoning entitlements or policy before the comprehensive plan. So again, this map reflects how Charlotte would grow and change if we didn't implement any recommendations from the comprehensive plan, if we continued with business as usual. So now we'll look at how the city will grow and change based on the direction and vision of the comprehensive plan. So the 2040 policy map, again, revised the adopted policies map by applying the new policies and the updated vision from the comp plan. So as you can see, a lot of it stays the same here, partially because of how well established and well served this neighborhood already is. But a few changes to note: the parks were protected through this mapping process. The existing neighborhoods were protected. The area of campus and neighborhood 2 along Central Avenue is now envisioned as a community activity center with an area of innovation mixed use. And the regional center along North Davidson was dialed back a bit in size, likely to better match the market conditions. So some key policies applied were from the Equitable Growth Framework, which uses mapping and data to try and improve access to housing, jobs, and goods and services. And the equitable growth framework also aims to mitigate environmental justice impacts. Other key policies in the comprehensive plan were aimed at protecting community assets, such as established neighborhoods, parks and preserves, and manufacturing sites, which provide really diverse jobs for the community. I'm just looking at the chat to answer a couple questions really quick before we dive in more. Nancy Pierce said, I don't understand regarding green space, Briar Creek Greenway and the Mary Oak School property shared use with Parks and Rec. So I don't know about those specific properties, but I know that a lot of times green space wasn't preserved in that second map that we looked at, because a lot of times it was zoned as something else and there wasn't a policy to protect it specifically as park space. So the goal now is to say, okay, the comprehensive plan really values those green spaces in our community. And so now they're going to get preserved as part of this new mapping process. Hopefully that answers your question. Cool. All right. And then Eric said it'd be nice to have the 3 steps in separate layers on the map so people can see the changes between. Okay, cool. So the last 3 slides we looked at are those separate layers. So I can flip through them really quick just so you guys can see again. So popping backwards. So this is the existing development. That's the adopted policies. So I'll just flip between those really quick so you can see those changes. Okay, and then from the adopted policies to the 2040 policy map. All right, Eric, looks like you have your hand up. If Erin and Maddie wouldn't mind unmuting, I think I probably misunderstood your question.
Yeah, thank you. It was more about having those as 3 separate map layers on the draft map online, so folks can kind of see, you know, what the changes are as they go, you know. Yeah.
Yes,
thank you.
That would be a great suggestion. We appreciate that. Okay, so just to give you guys a little more information about how the comprehensive plan policies impacted this map, we're going to walk through how those place types were revised on the adopted policies map to better align with the vision of the community and the comprehensive plan. So first we'll look at the mapping of the preservation policies. This is one of the key sets of policies from the comprehensive plan. They're aimed at protecting what were established as community assets, like the existing neighborhoods, which you can see in light yellow, the parks and preserves, which you can see in green, and the manufacturing sites in purple, which again, those provide really diverse jobs for the community. So the areas highlighted in blue show what would have not been preserved if we didn't implement that comprehensive plan guidance. And you can see a lot of those parks and existing neighborhoods are being preserved here. You can see the percent change in those place types on the right side of the slide. And I do want to note, it looks like neighborhood 1 is going down a little bit, and that's just because this park in that lower right side was preserved as part of this process, which makes it seem like neighborhood 1 is going down, but it's really just that what was being shown as neighborhood 1 in the adopted policies map is going down, not existing neighborhood 1. All of that's being preserved here. All right, so the next priority from the comprehensive plan was to map policies from the equitable growth framework. The 2040 policy mapping process aimed to use place types to improve access to jobs and housing and goods and services in underserved areas. And it also looked at reducing environmental justice impacts. Improving access to those 3 necessities and reducing environmental justice impacts is really a central goal of the comprehensive plan and is outlined within the plan's equitable growth framework. So the comprehensive plan calls for creating a more equitable future, which means we need to ensure that future growth and development benefits everyone. And in order to measure who does and doesn't currently benefit from past development, the plan included what we call the equitable growth framework, which again uses data and mapping to assess which areas have low access to housing diversity, jobs, goods and services, and which areas are being impacted by environmental justice issues. So on the slide here, you can see how this area measures in terms of providing access to housing. which is the top left, access to jobs, which is the top right, access to goods and services, which is the bottom left, and then environmental justice impacts, which is the bottom right. So in terms of providing that access, the areas outside of the black hatches are those that lack access. So you can see that overall this area has pretty good access. It's pretty well served. So we didn't need to recommend as many changes from the previous map to address inaccessibility. The one that stood out to us as having the least access was the access to housing opportunity, which is in that top left again. So taking a closer look at this map from the previous slide, on the map, again, areas outside of the black diagonal hatches are those that lack access to housing diversity, meaning you can't easily find a variety of housing types in these areas. So the bullet points on this page are the metrics that we use to understand where access to housing is currently lacking. And this step in the mapping approach was focused on making place type recommendations that would provide better housing unit diversity. So neighborhood 2 is a place type that helps provide those housing opportunities through unit diversity. Here you can see in orange where neighborhood 2 is being mapped, and it is actually filling in some of these access gaps. So you can see some along the plaza and some along Eastway Drive. Again, we're not going to count that high school area because we know that that's a school and that will remain a school. This really looks at how we tried to add some neighborhood 2 to address those gaps. And I will note again that it's hard in a neighborhood like this because it is so built out already. And we heard from people that these established and existing neighborhoods are really important to preserve. And then just looking briefly at environmental justice gaps. On this map, areas, again, outside of the black diagonal hatches are impacted by environmental justice issues. So you can see that this area is primarily impacted in those neighborhoods that are closer to the rail corridor and those major roadways. The bullet points at the top of the page are the metrics that were used to understand where environmental justice is currently lacking. And the place type mapping effort tried to find opportunities to buffer and create transitions to reduce the proximity between neighborhoods and that major transportation infrastructure. However, opportunities to provide buffering and transitions are pretty limited, again, based on the level of build out with existing development, which makes those buffers pretty hard to retrofit. So we're going to look at other tools outside of place types to explore how to address these inequities. And again, you can see those on the slide. Eric had a question about, is there an opportunity on major roadways and intersections to have more centers to increase housing opportunities? Yes, definitely. And that's one of the polling questions we're going to ask about to, again, make sure that that's in line with what people want for this area. So next we wanted to highlight what the previously mentioned place type recommendations mean for this area in terms of attracting new housing units and jobs. The city of Charlotte is projected to grow by almost 150,000 housing units by 2040. So given the place type recommendations within this specific area, this area would be projected to capture about 2,000 housing units, or approximately 1% of all new housing units citywide. And again, this low number has to do with the level of build out this area already. In terms of new jobs, the place types recommendations within this geography will bring approximately 3,800 new jobs, which is about 2% of the almost 200,000 new jobs projected for Charlotte by 2040. So finally, we're going to talk about concerns you have with the draft map. I see a couple more comments and questions in the chat, which we'll definitely record, and we are going to be asking you guys about commercial place types specifically. So I'm glad to hear that you're way ahead of us here. By talking through specific concerns, we expect that we'll be able to identify any adjustments to the mapping approach to help make the next draft more accurate and more in line with the vision. So the objective of this conversation is to collect feedback both on the current steps in the mapping approach as well as potential revisions to the approach. So there are two types of feedback that we can really use to revise that mapping approach. First, we're going to ask a couple poll questions to identify additional steps we could add to the mapping approach, which would help it better align with the Charlotte Comprehensive Plan. And then after that, we can discuss potential adjustments to the current mapping steps that will help improve the accuracy of the maps. So we do know that this is just a first pass. This is really a first draft of this map, and we hope that during this engagement, we can hear about what's working and what we can do better in the next draft. Because this is a citywide map, I do want to mention that we need to balance those long-term needs and opportunities, and we want to avoid super parcel specific or block by block changes and stick to looking at that overall approach so that we can be consistent in how place types are mapped across the city and so that no one area is getting special treatment. So we recognize that this approach is just a starting point, and we may have to add some additional steps to better align the map with the comprehensive plan. So we wanted to share a few suggestions for additional steps that we've heard from folks and see whether or not you all agree with the suggestions. So the additional steps that we've heard from our interdepartmental stakeholders relevant to this area are related to manufacturing and logistics. We've heard from our partners in economic development that some of the existing manufacturing and logistics sites, especially those close to uptown, may be better suited for other uses due to the changing needs of the manufacturing industry. And this really applies to this area in particular because it is so close to uptown. So our question for you all, is it more important to preserve existing manufacturing and logistics sites or to consider where repurposing these areas may better serve other community needs in the future? All right, I'm gonna give folks just a second to answer. Great, okay. So I think that's everyone. So it seems like people think it's more important to consider repurposing manufacturing logistics, and it seems like everyone is in agreement about this. How about innovation mixed use instead for manufacturing logistics areas? Yeah, we think that's a really good approach. It's something that is a natural transition for these places to go because they do have that existing built form of the manufacturing site, but that really can transition well into something like Camp North End, where those buildings become art studios and breweries and provide a lot of services for the community. So that's definitely something that, based on this feedback, we'll be looking at for the next step. All right, moving on to the next question. So next we're going to look at what we observed related to neighborhood 2. We've observed that there are a lot of large single-family lots located along major transportation corridors in the city, and these sites could evolve to neighborhood 2 to provide more housing options in the future. So our question for you all is it more important to preserve those existing single-family lots or to provide more housing options along major corridors? Again, just going to give everyone a little bit of time to answer. All right, I believe that is everyone. So it looks like overall, it's more important to provide more housing options to create that unit diversity that we were talking about. So that is really good feedback. We appreciate it. All right, last poll question for this section. We're going to look at what we heard about the commercial place type. So what we've heard from some of our planning colleagues is that a lot of the existing commercial development throughout Charlotte does not align with the comprehensive plan's vision for walkable and integrated communities. So our question is, how important is it that commercial places in this area evolve into neighborhood activity centers? think that's everyone. And I think I forgot to mention this for the last two, but yeah, we definitely welcome folks putting their answers as to why you selected which poll option you did in the chat. That's also really valuable information for us. It looks like everyone agrees that it's very important to start transitioning those to neighborhood activity centers. So again, based on this feedback, we're going to look at revising the mapping approach and incorporating some of these steps into how those place types are mapped. We have a comment from Eric that NC would be even better for the major intersections or CAC. All right, yeah, that's a super good point for those places where there is a ton of street access and where it wouldn't even make as much sense to have, you know, existing single family or something like that there. All right, so these are super helpful answers. We're now going to get to go into a little bit more detail about this place in particular. So we're going to talk about any concerns that you all have with the draft map. And by talking through those specific concerns, we expect that we'll be able to, again, identify adjustments to the mapping approach to help make the next draft more accurate. So since we can't sit around a table with a bunch of markers and draw all over a printed map, which is definitely our preference, we're going to use Zoom's annotate feature instead. So to open the annotate feature, there's a couple places you can find it. It's either going to be on the bottom right of your Zoom bar, or if you go to the top of the screen and hover at the top, you should see a drop down for view options, and it should be the third one down. So once you click the annotate tool, it should pop up a little bar that'll allow you to select a stamp. And then we're going to use the heart stamp on the map to indicate places that we want to talk about. And I will note that we have had some mixed success with folks having access to the annotate feature. So if you're not finding it, then definitely drop comments in the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you. And then we can just talk. This is a pretty small group, so we can just talk through the map that way as well. Yeah, so again, it should either be in the bottom right of the Zoom bar or under view options. So once you have the annotate tool and you use the stamp feature, you can click on the map to place the heart stamp. If you need to fix or remove a stamp, you can use the eraser tool, or you can click the mouse tool to get back to your normal mouse. We'll pull up the map in a second and give everyone a chance to place the heart stamps, or again, drop in the chat which area they want to talk about. And I just want to let folks know that we're just using the heart stamp because it's the easiest one to see on the map. Placing a heart somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that you like the way it's mapped. It may mean that you have concerns or you have a question. And after everyone's had a chance to really look at the map, absorb, digest, let us know which areas they want to talk about, we'll go through those areas step by step and answer questions.
Eric, are you still having trouble finding it? Yeah.
I think the problem is I might need to update my Zoom. And I think that's what it is. It's not showing up at all at the bottom or the top. So it might just be my version's outdated or something.
No worries. We can also add a stamp for you. I can if you would like, or if you just want to add any notes in the chat, I can also take those down for our notes from the meeting.
All right, I'm going to give everyone like maybe another minute or so to look at the map, and then we can start talking through these areas. And again, since this is a small group, we can definitely open it up to a conversation. Okay, so I think I'm just gonna start on the left side and move right. So it looks like someone placed a stamp around the corner of, let's see, like North Davidson and Matheson about. So if whoever placed that stamp wants to unmute, ask any questions. It's in that community activity center on the left side.
I think that was me. I got it to work. Just in favor of, and I think that's supposed to represent some TOD. I'm not sure exactly, right? So there's just, yeah, in the Cross Charlotte Trail, possibly there as well. So just all marking that.
Sweet. Yes, TOD is super valuable for adding density and, you know, doing it in a way where it doesn't interfere with the existing neighborhoods, but lets people live close to that transportation infrastructure. It looks like there's another one a little bit farther north of that. I want to say that's 36th Street and North Davidson.
That was also me as well. Yeah,
Perfect.
same
Okay.
reasons, but yep.
Same idea. Perfect. All right, we've got one down along Parkwood Avenue.
Yeah, that was me. And what we're seeing on that road looks to be more and more of neighborhood center or type neighborhood 2. So I was a little surprised that we weren't leaning a little more on that. Between that and our road diet and our bike lanes and everything that just went in there.
Great. Yeah, that's a great comment. I think in this step, there may have been, how do I say this? An instinct to overly prioritize neighborhood 1 based on what we heard during the comprehensive plan and what that process looked like. So it's really good to hear that there is support for maybe some neighborhood 2 or some neighborhood center in those areas that are naturally already densifying and seeing those improvements. So we will definitely record that.
Yeah, and I know some of it is up, and I've seen it on some other calls, connecting some of the stuff that's been recently rezoned, getting it manifested on the maps as we're seeing them now. I mean, it's a moving target always. I know you're never going to be perfect or anything on that front, but
yeah, that's a great point. Very true.
So certainly understood, but thank you.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear these things out loud and in these meetings, because that really gives us the legs to move on with that in the next mapping process. Looks like Eric, you've got your hand up. Do you have another question about this area?
Yeah, it was more about that 36 North Davidson there. I just wanted to point out that if you go to the block that's neighborhood 1 between Yadkin and North Davidson, I don't know if that was a mistake. It's marked on the draft map too by several people, including myself, how there is a center and then a neighborhood 1 and then the center that backs right up to North Davidson. I don't know if that was a mistake, but that should probably be switched. And I don't know if it was supposed to be swapped, those 2 sections, or it was just mislabeled neighborhood 1. It's right next to the heart. You can see it kind of, there's like the 3 blocks of blue and then 1 block.
Yep.
Yep.
I totally see that. I'm looking at it on the map now, and it's definitely not neighborhood 1. Yeah, so that's likely an error in translating the zoning. So again, good to flag those, and we'll take a closer look at them. Looks like Kevin, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, well, following up on the comment that that Philip made, to a lesser degree, I'd say the same thing about Belmont Avenue, which is almost entirely yellow, and there's nothing on that stretch of street that would qualify as yellow. That's definitely, maybe I'm not understanding neighborhood 1 versus 2, but it's all commercial and high density residential almost entirely on that level 6 block stretch.
Gotcha.
No, your understanding, right?
You are.
and it should be, right? And so I would expect to see that area as orange or blue or whatever the right piece is, just to reflect reality. And then the other thing, and I know you heard the comment about established neighborhoods and not changing too much, but
Mhm.
I would say there's a big difference between the opportunities west of the plaza and east of the plaza.
Okay.
That Hawthorne might be the better divider for that. But
Mhm.
as you get closer to the blue line, there's a lot of empty land.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity for a lot more orange to mix in where those, and I know it's lot by lot, so maybe that's just not the right way to think about it, but I would think the zoning for those areas should at least allow for more density when that land gets developed, because it's in the interest of the landowners and of the neighborhoods, and quite frankly of the city, to have more density near the public transportation. So,
Yeah, those are all really excellent points. You are definitely not misunderstanding neighborhood one. It is not supposed to include commercial or higher density. Yeah, and I think a lot of this is likely has to do with what those existing entitlements are and them not being able to keep up with how much this area is changing and not reflecting the opportunity in those areas that you guys are talking about. Yeah, so this is definitely really important stuff for us to look at. In the
yeah,
next
I would
step,
think if there's an empty piece of land in that area, it would be better for somebody to build a duplex or a quad than it would be for them to build a 3,500 square foot house.
Yes.
Just overall, I mean, you can have a whatever size house you want. I'm not objecting to big houses. I'm just saying that everybody would benefit from that option being available. If somebody still wants to put a house there of whatever size, it's totally cool with me, but it just seems like they should have the options to do other things with it, and it would be beneficial.
Yes, I personally am in complete agreement with you, and I think the comprehensive plan is as well. So these are definitely things we'll have to look at in revising the next version of the map.
I have one other question since I'm unmuted. Down at the bottom of the map, there's a big gray dot on what looks like a loop in a purple area. It says neighborhood center, sort of straight down from where the Parkwood Heart is. What is that?
I believe that is a stop along whatever that transit line is along Central Avenue. So those gray dots with the white outlines are transit stops, like high capacity transit stops.
That's phase 3 of the goal line, I believe.
Perfect, thank you.
Oh, okay, because that purple area right now is an apartment building and some manufacturing. So is this proposing that should be repurposed but into a neighborhood center?
No, I think it's just saying that the future goal line will have, oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yes, it's saying that because there's a transit stop there, it's likely that would, those uses would probably change over based on that proximity to transit.
Okay, and then one more little nitpicky thing. To the left of that, there's a big area that's marked as innovation and mixed use. A good section of that is city property for waste management. It's hard to imagine that moving. So yeah. I'm not sure it's realistic to suggest that that's going to get repurposed. I don't, unless the city has a plan for it. From what I've ever heard, that's permanent. So,
I won't speak for them, but I'm guessing that they continue to need those uses.
Okay.
So
yeah, well,
that's another good point.
We do want our trash picked up.
Yeah, and I know there's been some discussion in what place type utility uses get included in. And that's something I think we're gonna have to look more closely in the next step, because yeah, we've heard several times that those bigger utility uses are getting lumped into a place type where they don't necessarily make sense.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. It looks like we have another heart along Central Ave in that kind of central portion.
I put one there. It's mostly just referencing, there's a couple of places where we see right on Central. We addressed both issues before, though, already on this call, but some of it's still showing commercial, and honestly, some of it really we need to be looking at least neighborhood too, if not an activity center of some sort. It's a busy road. It's destined for transit. We're missing the boat if we don't allow more intense uses. And less car uses, I should say.
Yeah, very much agreed. Yeah, a neighborhood center or a neighborhood 2 would make that much more walkable and much more supportive of that transit investment. Cool. Yeah, so it sounds like we've got a lot of areas to look at for this particular one. But this is good. This is exactly the kind of feedback that we need. All right, one more heart I'm seeing on that far right side along Central Ave, close to the intersection of Eastway. Nancy, was that one you? I'm not sure.
Okay, so I put the heart and removed it and removed it. I wasn't sure if it was part of the conversation actually, but
Mhm.
that is Mary Oak School right there. And the school system actually owns property all the way up to Arnold Drive. So it's a huge piece of property in there.
Uh-huh.
And several years ago, Park and Rec and the school system got into a joint use agreement where Park and Rec developed some of it, made a trail and all that. So I do think it should be I don't know if there's a way to show that long-term as parks and preserves, and the other thing is, it's a little odd, or perhaps there's a rationale for why institutions such as elementary schools and high schools should be, I guess it's the underlying zoning that makes it neighborhood 2, yet they're really public. They're more like institutional.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they be different or their own kind of designation?
Mhm. That's a good question. I do think that there's some mistake here in them showing as neighborhood 2. I think it would make more sense for them to be neighborhood 1 in this instance, since that's kind of the use that they're surrounded by. But the idea was just that any single family neighborhood is going to have those institutional uses mixed in. That's a natural part of that place type.
Right.
So the idea was that looking at a neighborhood holistically, schools would be a natural part of that and included in that place type as a whole, without any intention of them transitioning to,
Right.
actual housing.
But they are a campus, so it just seems.
Yeah, yes. The idea was, this was a conversation that we had a lot of times.
Okay.
But the idea was really reserving campus for like larger clusters of like offices or universities. Yeah, things that are more than just that like neighborhood institutional use.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know what not having parks and preserves there where it actually is, as Park and Rec does, so designates it currently down at the school site. I mean, what I mean, I guess what would be the downside of doing that or upside of not doing that? Does it really make a difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. My guess would be is that it was just a small enough parcel where there was an automatic process where like really small parcels were just integrated into their surrounding use.
Yeah.
But I do think, to your point, it's probably really good for those parks and preserves places to continue to be called out. So maybe we look at a step in the process where those small parcels are absorbed unless there are parks and recreation use, in which case they do get to stay so that people can really see that those are being maintained.
Okay.
Yeah,
That was really it. That's why I removed it and then put it back and removed it. I wasn't really sure.
No, that stuff is really good to hear. And again, it's when we hear these things that we can start turning the wheels on how to revise the process to make it really more accurate and more in line with the vision.
Thanks, Mackenzie.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate it. Eric, you've got your hand back up.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that conversation. If you zoom in, which you can't do there, but on the draft map, the Mary Oaks is actually in neighborhood 1. The actual campus part of it is in neighborhood 1, not 2. It looks like orange is there, but when you zoom in, it's not. And then just to add to part of the explanation why schools are not included in their own thing is because the UDO is going to be focusing more on less use and more about the form of it. So it's not as picky when it comes to neighborhood functions like a school.
Could I ask a question about that, since you brought up the use form rather than use, and I understand that about the UDO. A while back, before even anyone was thinking about UDO, there was a thought that automobile related businesses belonged in the out beyond, I don't know, farther out of town. And I understand that would be an exception to the idea of not having things use related, but I've noticed that, along the light rail, along Independence, it's automobile this, automobile that, automobile this. So is there any exception where automobile related businesses, particularly sales, would not be as a use permitted, or is it never about use and always about form? Make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question that I'll admit is a little bit over my head as part of the place types process.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully the UDO folks would welcome that comment and be able to answer it for you. My guess is a lot of it is just has to do with what's on the ground today,
Right.
as this hasn't been regulated at all up until this point. Yeah,
Thought
so
about it. They thought about it a while back, but it didn't.
yeah. Yeah, my hope is that the UDO would say that there is some consideration of that use. And I guess I'll also mention that the form would also, you know, preclude some of those uses if you're not allowing large garages or parking in front of the building or those kinds of things, drive-throughs, etc. In some ways, the form still could dictate away those automobile-oriented uses.
Right.
Nancy, not to complicate things, but the UDO process, review process is ongoing right now too.
Right, this afternoon at West Charlotte High School.
Perfect. I was going to say, I
You're
just
going,
didn't know
correct.
about
No,
that.
I understand, but that's really the place to drill down on these details.
On that one, definitely.
Got it.
This is, what does the map look like? And
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, but they will definitely be able to tell you more
Yeah.
accurately
Yeah,
than me.
understood, totally.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good question though. I'm curious to hear what their thinking is on that right now.
Right.
And I want you to ask that question there, please.
Yes. But one thing you relate back to the map though, commercial place type, I think fits perfectly into what, you know, the place type policy mapping and how that gets translated into the UDO, right? And I think the commercial allows more auto-centric type uses like that. So as we mentioned earlier in the meeting, that those should probably not be in these neighborhood areas like that, because you know, they would be focusing more on the car oriented and less about, you know, the pedestrian, biking, and multimodal.
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric. And what I'll mention is that commercial today, what we classify as commercial today is extremely automobile oriented, and the existing place types map is reflective of those current uses. But there is the idea that as commercial uses evolve, there would be guidance embedded in the place types to not completely remove those auto-oriented uses because they have to go somewhere, but to at least create design changes in them that make them more friendly to the pedestrian. So, you know, maybe they could still have a drive-through, but maybe it's not between the building and the street. Maybe it has to be behind the building, or, you know, they still can have a large degree of parking, but maybe there has to be more street frontage than there has been in the past, or there has to be more pedestrian paths than there has been in the past. So there's an idea that over time, those would start to, you know, slowly transform into more pedestrian friendly places while still accommodating those auto uses, which again, they have to go somewhere, maybe not in this neighborhood, but they have to go somewhere. Yeah.
Maybe.
I like your thinking. Great. Okay, so we are down to a couple minutes left. So unless anyone has anything else pressing, I think I'll move on to the next steps.
Can we take a screenshot real quick, Mackenzie? If we're
Yeah,
done.
go for it.
Okay, great, thanks.
And again, if you guys think of anything else during this process, definitely feel free to go online. We have the online map collecting additional feedback through the 14th.
We're good to go, Mackenzie.
Cool, thanks, Maddie. Which, yes, again, I like that the hearts stay on this slide, in my view at least. Okay, so the community conversations, again, are going to continue through November 10th. All the sessions are recorded and they're available on the project website. So if there was an area that you're interested in that you didn't get to attend the meeting for, you can go onto the website and watch that meeting. And again, provide input on the place types map online. There are some makeup schedules that are going to be put on through the rest of phase 2, as well as they're trying to do some in-person office hours where folks can come in and actually look at a physical map and have a more one-on-one conversation for any areas that you're concerned about. The online comment form is open through November 14th, and we also have hard copies of that available in some libraries and YMCAs around the city. Again, for those folks who maybe don't feel as comfortable with the online platform, we have some alternatives. So the community feedback will be used to identify any revisions to the mapping approach throughout the next couple months. And we're aiming to have a second draft of the map in early 2022 with all of those suggestions incorporated. So I believe either Maddie or Erin's gonna drop some of those links in the chat for you right now. So I'll leave the meeting up so that anyone can access those links for the next couple of minutes. But I just want to say big thank you to you all for participating. This is the exact type of input we need in revising for the next step. It was a super useful conversation, and it's nice to hear that folks are on the same page and really interested in those more walkable and mixed use places.
I had a quick question. Will there be more feedback in sessions like this for the second draft?
There will, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
we're gonna go through. We're gonna revise it a little bit based on what we've learned during this process, but yeah, it will be at least as, if not more robust than this one has been.
Good job, Area 11.
You guys crushed it.
The only other thing I would add is the finding the draft map is a little hard. You know, it's kind of buried in the text. And then when you go to, I think the ArcGIS story map, it's not there at all. So yeah, just maybe getting that more visible so folks can provide that feedback online.
Yes, agreed. All right, hopefully everyone has had the chance to get to those links. Let's stop sharing. All right, thank you all again for your participation. It was really useful to us. Great conversation. Have a great rest of your day. And again, please reach out if you have any other questions. Yeah, sorry, Maddie.
Sorry, Mac. Eric, there is now a link on our front page that says online map, just so that you know. That was recently added, so it's a little easier to find. So if you're telling people where to look, that first blurb has all of the major links.
Perfect, thanks. I put the link
Absolutely.
to the story map in the chat. That is the link to it on that page.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah, so it has the policy map as one of the tabs next to overview, but it does not include, it points out through the process, but
Gotcha. Yeah,
link.
that's from our first survey. So if you visit our website, the main website on the front page, we have the online map application now listed there. So gotcha. That's kind of our archive of the survey and the first phase. Now that we moved on to phase 2, I would check that main website for any updates.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Absolutely.
Thanks, all right, have a good rest of your day, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.